I used to live in a small apartment in a quiet suburb outside of Chicago, specifically in Illinois, one of those places people call perfectly safe. It was a neighborhood filled with families, parks, and kids playing in the street every afternoon. I had a normal desk job and I'd get home around 6 p.m. every day, open my apartment door, and catch the scent of leftover coffee from the pot, trying to shake off the weariness of the day. Life was quiet and monotonous, full of a routine that made you feel like you were in control of your life. That was until Thursday, the day the package arrived. I'd just walked into my apartment after work, the sun still setting behind the trees, the air crisp like a typical Midwestern autumn. I found the package in front of my door. It was a standard brown cardboard box, medium size, with no weird markings other than a USPS shipping label. It was addressed to me. Jonathan Harrison, 1427 Elm Street, Oak Grove, IL. I hadn't ordered anything, not even from Amazon. I quickly opened it with my keys and found a layer of bubble wrap. After lifting it, I saw the necklace. It was a small silver pendant that had belonged to my mother, a necklace that had vanished more than 7 years ago. I remembered it well. A simple design, a tiny heart engraved with my initial, J. Mom always wore it on my birthdays, but it disappeared right after she passed away back when I was living in my old apartment downtown. I'd searched for it for weeks, even accused the neighbors of stealing it, but I never found it. Now, it was sitting right in front of me, shining just as it had when she wore it. No scratches, as if 7 years hadn't passed at all. My heart stopped for a second and my hands trembled as I picked it up. Underneath the necklace, I found a small, folded piece of paper with a handwritten note. "Missing you, John. I'm still watching you." There was no signature. The paper looked like it came from an old notebook, and it smelled like my old house. I sat on the kitchen floor, sweating despite the chill, and began to ask myself, who knew my new address? Who had been holding onto that necklace all these years? I started replaying my memories like a slow-motion film. I remembered things that had been moved around over the last year. Once I found my coffee mug in the sink, even though I was certain I'd put it in the cabinet. Another time I found an old photo of my mother on the table that I hadn't seen in years. I used to tell myself I was just overworked, but the necklace made me connect the dots. I called the police, and 2 officers arrived. One, named Richards, was tall and looked exhausted. The other was younger. They examined the package and confirmed the USPS barcode was real, but the sender's address in California was fake. There were no security cameras on my street, the officer said. It's probably a prank, and advised me to install a doorbell camera, but I felt like their eyes were saying something else. They asked me about enemies, old relationships, anyone who might know details about my mother. I told them about the period after she passed, the depression that led me to sell most of her things, and the necklace that had been a symbol of her. Officer Richards wrote everything down and said, "We'll open an investigation, but stay cautious." After they left, I locked every door and pulled the curtains, sitting in the living room and watching the street from the window. It was past 1 a.m. and the wind was shaking the trees outside. Suddenly I heard a faint sound, like footsteps on the outer stairs. I grabbed the old handgun I'd inherited from my father, which I'd never used, and went down to check. I found no one, but there was a muddy footprint on the back porch, a large size, and not mine. I googled unsolicited packages and found tons of stories on Reddit about stalkers sending personal items to terrorize victims. A woman in Texas mentioned that a man had been following her for years and started sending her photos from inside her house. My heart pounded as I searched my desk drawer for any old evidence. I found my mother's old journals and started reading. On a page from 2016, she wrote that she felt like someone was watching the house, a stranger she'd seen standing across the street. She hadn't thought much of it then. Now, everything was linked. I fell asleep, clutching the gun, and in the morning I woke to a light knock on the door. I opened it to find a second, smaller package. I opened it with shaking hands to find the key to my old apartment, the one that had gone missing along with the necklace. There was a new note. I know you read the journals. 2 days following the second package were hell. I didn't sleep, watching every shadow on the street. I called the police almost every hour, but they said there wasn't enough evidence for protection. Officer Richards came by again and checked the Amazon camera I'd installed. He found it had been disabled right when the second package arrived. He said, "This guy is a professional." I started remembering small details. The neighbor who always moved his car at the exact time I arrived home. The mail that always arrived late. The feeling that I could smell old perfume in the kitchen. At 7 a.m., I left for work, but I came back 3 hours early and found my door ajar. I entered cautiously and found the apartment tidied up. On my bed lay my mother's old nightgown, something she had gotten rid of years ago. It smelled exactly the same, and on it was a note. "She loved you more than you can imagine. I'm taking her place." I was steps away from insanity. What was happening? Did someone intend to kill me or rob me? I stopped eating, terrified of the kitchen, scared to order takeout. I survived only on food from work, and my weight dropped from the fear. I called the police again. They searched the apartment and found strange prints on the windows and boot tracks in the back garden. Officer Richards said they would have an undercover officer watch the area. That night, I heard a soft sigh from the bedroom. I walked in and found the curtain open. I looked out the window and saw a tall man standing in the dark. When I turned on the light, he vanished. The police came, but found nothing. I began to lose control, drinking too much, talking to myself. On the third day, a third package arrived containing photos of me sleeping, taken from the angle of the closet. The photos were from weeks ago. The last photo was of me standing at the window watching the street, and in the reflection, the man's shadow inside the room. That night, I decided to run. I packed my things, and as I was heading out the back door, I heard footsteps behind me. I ran to the car, started the engine, and in the rearview mirror, I saw his face. He was a man in his 50s with white hair and cold, black eyes. He smiled and waved goodbye. I sped away, trying to call the police, but the signal cut out. I reached the station and told them everything. Officer Richards said they'd caught a suspect near my house, but when we got there, he had already escaped. Now, I'm living in a motel out of town under a different name. Every night, I hear footsteps I can't identify. As I lie in bed, scrolling through the news, I get an SMS. "You can't run. I know your new address." The police say they're investigating, but I know time is running out. If anyone is reading my story and gets a package, never open it. And if you do, run immediately. I'm still waiting for the police. The nights are long and sleep escapes me. My life is essentially destroyed, and I have no idea what to do. People who frequently stay in hotels should be careful. Not all hotels are safe, and we've all heard terrifying stories about things happening behind closed hotel room doors. What happened to me is something I'll never be able to move past or forget, to put it briefly. After a long night of exhausting driving on frozen highways, I decided to check into a hotel to get some rest. The hotel looked old and was relatively cheap, though it seemed modern from the outside. I walked into the lobby at 9:15 p.m., checked in, paid, and went up to sleep. By 10 p.m., due to sheer exhaustion, I fell asleep fully clothed. I only took off my shoes. I woke up in that old hotel in downtown Chicago, my heart beating with a strange, slow rhythm, as if something were waiting for me. The room was pitch black, the heavy curtains drawn, and the clock on the nightstand read 3 a.m. I reached for the small bedside lamp, feeling an unnatural chill creeping over my body, despite the room being heated. When I turned the light on, my eyes were immediately drawn to the door. The strange thing was, it wasn't locked. It was cracked open a few inches, as if someone had slipped out very quietly and left it that way. I remembered clearly that I had locked it before going to sleep. I even checked the latch twice, having heard stories about thefts in this old part of the city. I sat up on the bed, my breathing quickening, my mind trying to convince me it was just a lapse in memory due to fatigue. But the reality was worse. I got up slowly, my first step as cautious as if I were walking on broken glass, and reached for the door. The deadbolt was intact but hadn't been turned. I pushed it gently and heard a faint sound like metal scraping. The hallway outside was empty, illuminated by dim, flickering neon lights. A faint, strange odor hung in the air, a mixture of sweat and cheap cologne. I went back inside and slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt 3 times, then sat on the edge of the bed to think. How long had the door been open? Had it been like that all night? I began to search the room slowly. My suitcase was in place, but the clothes inside looked like someone had touched them. The small drawer was slightly ajar, and my wallet was partially pulled out. There was no obvious theft, but the feeling that someone had been there, breathing the same air I was, watching me sleep, made my skin crawl. I remembered a faint sound I'd heard before falling asleep. Light footsteps on the worn-out carpet. Was it real, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I reached for my phone to call the front desk, but the signal was weak, and it was too late at night. I decided to wait for morning. Sleep was no longer an option. I lay back down, eyes wide open, listening to every sound in the hotel. The creaking of pipes, the wind whispering outside the window, and distant footsteps in the hallway. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness, and every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a face standing behind the door, watching me through the narrow crack. This was just the beginning, and I didn't yet know how much worse the night would get. As the minutes passed, I started noticing small details that began to pile up into an unbelievable, real-life nightmare. The bed had strange indentations, as if extra weight had sat on it for a while and then moved. The extra pillow was slightly pressed down, and the smell of that faint sweat was stronger now near the bed. I got up again, my heart pounding like a war drum. I started searching the room methodically. There was nothing under the bed. In the bathroom, I noticed the towel I had hung up was lying on the floor, as if a hand had brushed against it. I turned on the shower. The water was cold, but had someone else used it? I didn't know. I returned to the room and sat on the chair facing the door, gripping a small knife from my suitcase. A primitive defensive weapon, but it gave me a false sense of security. The time ticked by to 4 o'clock, then 4:30 a.m. I heard a sound from the hallway. Slow footsteps that stopped in front of my door for a few seconds, then continued. Was it an employee or another drunk guest? I knocked on the door quietly and asked in a trembling voice, "Who's there?" No one answered. I waited for a few minutes and then opened the door with extreme caution. The hallway was empty, but at the end of it, I saw a shadow disappear around the corner. I went back inside and started gathering my thoughts. Maybe it was just a common thief who broke in looking for cash, saw me sleeping, and left quietly. But if it were a thief, why didn't they take anything? My wallet was full of cash and my phone was on the nightstand. The fear began to turn into genuine terror when I noticed a small spot on the carpet near the bed. A dark spot, maybe blood or something else, but it was dry. Had it been there before? I couldn't remember. I started imagining scenarios. Someone who knew me followed me from the airport. waited until everyone was asleep, and entered the room using a stolen key or a simple tool. In America, these things happen daily in cheap hotels, stories of former guests coming back or corrupt employees. Well, I remembered a news story I read months ago about a man in Detroit who entered guest rooms and took pictures of them sleeping for months. Was that what happened? I grabbed the phone again and tried to call the police, but the signal was terrible, and the automated response just said to wait. I went out to the hallway and knocked on the neighboring doors, but no one answered. The hotel was dead quiet. I went back to the room, and in a moment of despair, I opened the closet. I found strange clothes hanging there, clothes that weren't mine. An old black shirt and dirty sneakers. I felt nauseous. Where did they come from? Did someone put them there while I was sleeping? I sat on the floor trying to breathe as the memories flooded back. The sound of faint breathing near my ear before I woke up, which I had thought was a dream. Now, everything matched up. Someone had spent hours in the room with me, maybe sitting there watching me, touching my things, breathing my air. My hands began to tremble, and I was drenched in sweat despite the cold. I waited until dawn. Every minute felt like an hour, and every sound felt like a threat. This wasn't just a faulty lock. It was something far more terrifying. A real person. Flesh and blood had been there, and they weren't far away. When daylight finally broke, I left the room like a fugitive. I reported all the details to the front desk, and the police arrived an hour later. They searched the room and took pictures, but they didn't find any conclusive evidence. They said it might have been a random thief or a mistake by the cleaning staff. They took my information and promised an investigation, but I knew that cases like this are closed quickly in cities like Chicago. I left the hotel that day and returned to my home in the suburbs. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing strange things. A black car parked in front of my house for hours, then vanishing. Text messages from an unknown number. I locked all the windows and installed cameras. Then one night I woke up again to a faint sound in the house. The back door wasn't fully latched. I didn't find anyone, but on the table, there was a half-empty glass of water that I hadn't put there. The police came back again and said I was just paranoid. Now I live in a state of constant terror. I look behind me everywhere I go, and I sleep with one eye open. My mind won't stop asking questions. Who was that person? Did they know me? Are they still following me? The police haven't gotten anywhere, and the night always holds the possibility of his return. Maybe, at this very moment, he is reading these words too, smiling because I didn't lock the door properly again. The end hasn't come yet, and I am still waiting. The day that changed my life started out perfectly normal, just like any other day in Chicago. I was working at my office downtown. The weather was biting cold, like every winter here, and the wind was hitting my face as I stepped out of the building. I decided to head to this small coffee shop 2 blocks away called Bean Haven. It's a relatively quiet place where people sit on their laptops, drinking black coffee without saying much. I'd go there every day after work to check my emails and think about my life, which had become a boring routine. The first time I noticed him, he was sitting in the back corner, a man in his 40s with messy gray hair, wearing an old leather jacket and thick glasses. He was staring straight at me, not blinking. At first, I thought he was just another eccentric local, like so many people in this city. On the second day, at the same place and time, I noticed the same stare. By the third day, I started to feel uneasy. I was sitting in the cafe by the window, drinking a latte and writing a report, and when I looked up, I found him watching me as if he were memorizing my face. He didn't smile, didn't move his head. His eyes were fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine, and I told myself, he's just a people watcher. By the 4th and 5th days, the situation continued. I started noticing small, creepy details. He knew I liked my coffee without sugar, and after 2 days I noticed he was ordering the exact same drink. One time, I left my bag on the chair to call a coworker, and when I came back, I found it had been moved slightly. Inside was a small note that wasn't mine, an old photo of me from Facebook, taken during a trip to California 5 years ago. I was terrified. Who had put it there? The man was sitting in his usual spot, looking at me with the same quiet, terrifying intensity. I never approached him, but I felt like he was closing in on me. I started changing my schedule, going to the cafe at different times, but he was always there. My coworkers told me, maybe he's just a regular stalker. But in America, stalkers aren't just regular. I felt even more scared when I discovered he knew my home address. One day I came home to find a coffee cup from Bean Haven on my doorstep. It was cold and it had a note on it. "You like your coffee cold now?" There was no signature, but I knew who it was. The police said there wasn't enough evidence because he hadn't directly threatened me, and there was no physical proof. But I was living in terror every day. Every night, I checked the doors and windows twice, hearing phantom sounds in the darkness. That man was building my life around him without saying a single word. Over time, the fear turned into real paranoia. I started monitoring everything around me. At work, I noticed an old black car always parked on the street across from the building. I was sure he was inside it. Once, while leaving the gym in the evening, I heard footsteps behind me on a quiet street. I turned around, saw no one, but a few minutes later I saw him sitting on a park bench nearby, watching me from afar. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone to call the police again. They told me, if there's no physical contact or clear threat, we can't do anything. That's the law in America. You have to suffer actual harm before they step in. I went home, locked everything, and started searching for him online. I couldn't find a photo, but I found old reports about a similar man in New York who had stalked people for years. Was it the same guy? Had he moved to Chicago for a fresh start? I started completely changing my routine, like going to a different supermarket, taking side streets, and sometimes crashing at a friend's place. Once, while checking my emails at work, I found a message from a strange address. "I know you like reading true crime books, just like what happened to your former neighbor in Boston." I actually had lived in Boston and my neighbor had been killed in an unsolved case. How did he know that? I started doubting everyone around me, even my friends. Was one of them selling my information? I couldn't sleep. I lost weight and my eyes were red from exhaustion. At the cafe, he would come in every day to order his coffee. Once I decided to confront him, but when I walked over, he suddenly disappeared and the chair was empty. The barista said, "I haven't seen anyone sitting there today." Was I imagining things? The photo in my bag was real. Days passed and the tension increased. I noticed him showing up in other places, at the supermarket, at the subway station, even in the background of a selfie my friend took at a party. He was collecting information on my entire life. I felt like he was preparing for something big, and I was helpless. The police finally opened a file, but it was agonizingly slow. In America, stalking cases take so long to process that victims end up paying the price. I was afraid to go out alone, and every shadow on the street made me freeze. The night that changed everything was pouring with rain. I got home late, and the street was empty. I opened the door and found the house strangely rearranged. My books were lined up the way I used to like them years ago, and the pictures on the wall were in slightly different spots. I walked into the kitchen and found a hot cup of coffee on the table, exactly the kind I like. My heart exploded in my chest. Had he been here? I ran to check the rooms but found no one. On the bathroom mirror, written in soap, it said, "I'm very close now." I called the police immediately. They searched the house and found strange fingerprints, but they didn't match any criminal records. For the next 2 days, he disappeared from the cafe entirely. I felt a temporary sense of relief, but it was an illusion. On the fourth morning, I woke up to a light knock on the door. I opened it to find no one there, but on the floor was a small package. And I opened it to find an old paper containing every detail of my life. My days, my dreams, even thoughts I had written in a personal journal that had been lost for years. On the last page it read, "The game is over. I know everything about you, and you're going to be part of my story." After that, he disappeared completely. I expected he had moved to another state, which happens often in stalking cases. Now I live in constant fear, feeling like he's watching me from afar every single day. Every time I see a gray-haired man in public, I freeze. To this day, I don't know who he is or why he chose me. The case is still open, and the fear continues. Maybe he's preparing for the next step, or maybe he's just enjoying the wait. I don't know, and that's what's killing me every day.